Okay, if you haven't registered for the course, go over here and see Pam. She has her hand up. She'll get you registered. There's one more seat at a card table right up here and one more right here if you want to sit at one of these tables. And there's one right here next to Fran, I think. All right, we're going to get started. That clock there is about 3 minutes behind. And so we're going to go ahead and kick it in gear. I am so delighted that you're here. And for those of you that are watching by live stream, we're glad that you're on also. Intercession is one of my favorite things to do, to talk about. I probably, more so than, there's two gifts actually three gifts I gravitate toward. And one of them is the intercessor. The other one is the apostle and the prophet. I have a tendency to gravitate toward those. Having been a leader in the church and also an intercessor, I know how we think. And so many times I will hear intercessors say, my pastor doesn't understand me. And I can tell you why he doesn't understand you. It's because that you have not learned his language. You're trying to teach him your language and how you see things, but you haven't learned his language. And once you learn his or her language and you begin learning how to speak that and build relationship with he or she, all of a sudden your pastor begins understanding you. So many times as intercessors, we just come up cold turkey. It's kind of like an evangelist going to someone out on the street corner and saying, are you saved? And they'll say, what? And that's kind of the same way an intercessor is when they approach their church leader. They tell him something he has not a clue what they're talking about. And mainly because we haven't learned their language. The intercession has been a part of my life since 1976 when I got saved. Cheryl and I grew up in the same town. There were two major arteries of rivers that flowed into our town with a lot of heavy traffic on those rivers, barge traffic. And we spent a lot of time out in the wilderness, out in the river, out in the woods, hunting, fishing, and doing that sort of thing. My kids, we were raising them before we moved from Alabama. The only meat they ever ate was deer, squirrel, rabbit, and dove. That's what they ate. And very good stuff. And but after I got saved, we did eat beef too, occasionally, and chicken. It's another story for another time. My wife is here, and she will be correcting me throughout the night. But because of having that mindset of being raised the way that we were, when I got saved, I began spending a lot of time in the woods and on the lakes and the rivers talking to the Lord, and began developing a prayer life with him. Most people, when they see an intercessor, a seasoned intercessor pray, they say, well, they really have the gift of intercession, and they don't have a gift. There's nowhere in the Bible that intercession is called a gift. It actually is something that all of us should do. But what they have done is they have honed it so to where it's easy, very easy for that intercessor to operate and see that gift manifest. So we spent a lot of times out in the woods. My dog and cat would go with me. I'd spend the night in the woods and just really crying out to the Lord, talking to the Lord. This became a pattern for my life. When I got into, and most of that intercession, I didn't know what I know now. When I stepped into a higher level of intercession, and that's what this is about, was that Cheryl and I went to Boston, and Dutch and Lou Engle and Will Ford were doing the Kettle Tour. And I went to one of their prayer strikes, and I was just blown away by what I heard. And I was intimidated, blown away, because these guys were praying in a way that I had never heard anybody pray. Lou Engle was rocking so hard, I thought he was going to hit his head on the back wall behind him. That's how hard he was rocking. And it got to where it was just like ricocheting bullets. One would pray, and bam, another would pray, and there was no place in between there. There was no space in between the praying. And I thought to myself, this is what I want to do. And then they turned to me and they said, when they finished praying, they said, Ken, do you want to pray? Well, I really didn't. because I was so intimidated by the way that they prayed. They had prayed with such authority that I had never stepped into before. And so several things took place. My alignment with Dutch took place, which creates another synergy and another authority. And then I learned how to pray with authority also, and learned different ways to pray. There's a synergy that was created. And if you go to page 5, there was a synergy that was created when I first saw Dutch and Lou and Will Ford. There was such a synergy that things were shifting in the atmosphere while they were praying. It wasn't something that was taking place down the road. You could feel the atmosphere shifting. Later on, when I began going on these prayer strikes with Dutch, we would see tremendous shifts. Because of a dream that Cheryl had, we went up into D.C. Back in 2004, 2005, when Justice Alito and Justice Roberts were being confirmed for the hearings. Prior to their, now let me back up. It was prior to Rehnquist dying and Sandra Day O'Connor resigning. And God has spoken and said that he wanted some people off the bench through her dream. And so we went up there. We had no clue which ones God wanted to remove. We just know that he did. And so we went up there and began praying, and the prayers were so synergistic, except at that time in the Supreme Court, you could not take your Bible in there. If you took your Bible in there, you would have been kicked out. And we pray with our eyes open. And we did use scriptures out of the hotel room, the Gideon Bible. I would tear pages out of it and fold it up and take it into the court with me so I could just hold it in the palm of my hand and read it. I told one of the Gideons this, and he just thought that was awesome. And but such a synergy is created. And it says in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verses 9 through 12, it says, 2 are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. For if either of them falls, the one will lift up his companion. But woe to the one who falls when there is not another to lift him up. Furthermore, if 2 lie down together, they keep warm. But how can one be warm alone? And if one can overpower him who is alone, 2 can resist him. And a cord of 3 strands is not quickly torn apart. So we're going to take this time to talk about synergy, but we're going to pray right now. So, Father, I just thank you, Lord, for this class. I thank you, God, that this is the upperclassmen. People who are moving into high level of intercession. And God, I give you praise and honor that you will give me words to speak that will penetrate every heart, that you would give us ears to hear and hearts to receive. And Father, I thank you for doing this in Jesus' name. Synergy defined is the combined action or functioning. It's not just an individual doing this. When a synergy can't be created by an individual, it's created when at least 2 or more begin coming together. I could call this corporate intercession, this chapter here, but I chose to call it synergy. Because when you have 2 people who are focused on praying the same thing and their heart is set on that, things begin to shift. The authority level becomes stronger because of your synergy. And whereas one person may not be able to move something, because it says here, if one can't overpower him, 2 can. If one can't move something, 2 may be able to move it. And so synergy is very important. Corporate intercession is very important for you and I to be a part of, because it literally shakes things up in the heaven. It says the cooperative action of 2 or more muscles, nerves, or the like. The cooperation action of 2 or more stimuli or drugs. The interaction of 2 or more agents or forces, so that their combined effect is greater than the sum of their individual effects. Cooperative interaction among groups, especially among the acquired subsidiaries or merged parts of a corporation, that creates an enhanced combined effort. Now, the word synergy is a New Testament word. It's the word synergos. And it means co-labor or fellow labor. You can look that up in the Strong's 4904 in the New Testament. From the base of 4862, which means union, with or together, association, companionship, process. It's from the base of ergon 2041, which means to toil. And so when you're moving into intercession, you're toiling together, you're working together. Just like last week, we did 3 prayer strikes here on the Space Coast. We did a prayer strike on yesterday, a week ago at NASA, and Hal and got us in there. And we did a strong prayer strike there. We feel like that there's going to be a revival, I do, of the space program back to what it was many years ago, even during the times of the moon launch and all of that. And then on Saturday, tomorrow, a week ago, we did a prayer strike. 2 weeks ago, wasn't it? 2 weeks ago tomorrow, we did a prayer strike from the north end of the county all the way down to the south end, stopping at major places along the way. And there was such a synergy that was created as we were going. You could literally feel the synergy taking place in the van. There's no doubt in my mind that we're going to see very soon some results of the prayers that were prayed on this tour that we did through the Space Coast a few weeks ago. And then last Saturday, we went from the south end of the county to the north end. We did this based on Cindy Jacobs' word. Her word said that the Lord is going to release the glory on the coastline and the coastland. So on one of them, we did the coastline coming down A1A. The second one, we did the coastland coming up US 1. And there was such a synergy that was created there. Co-laboring was taking place. Corporate synergism is the power of agreement. Matthew 18:19. I want us to turn there and read this because this is very important. Some of you know this. He says, again, I say to you that if 2 of you agree on earth about anything that they may ask, it shall be done for them by my Father who is in heaven. Now that word agree there is the word symphoneo in the Greek. It's where we get the word harmonious, or to accord, or to sound together. So when 2 people are in accord and sounding the same thing together, they begin to see sometimes immediate results. You take an orchestra, when they're tuning up, you hear all these different instruments tuning, and they sound terrible. Anybody ever heard an orchestra tune up? It's one of the most terrible sounds you ever want to hear, until the conductor gets up there and taps his wand. And he comes up like this, and then all those tuned instruments begin coming into harmony and symphony together. Symphoneo. That's what Jesus was saying there. He said, if any of 2 of you create a symphony, if any 2 of you are moving harmoniously or in one accord, nothing's going to be impossible to you. Whatever you ask the Lord, He's going to do that. He says there in number 2, he says, again, I will tell you that if 2 of you agree on earth, harmonize together, make a symphony about anything, everything, whatever they shall ask, it shall be done for them by my Father in heaven. Now, Ed Cole says this, and I heard this years ago back in the 80s. He says, agreement is the power of life. Disagreement is the power of death. Now, in the setting that he was saying it, he was talking to husbands and wives. And he was talking about how husbands and wives need to be in agreement. That began to develop Cheryl and I's relationship, that word agreement there, that the agreement is the power of life, and that she nor I make any major decisions without being in complete, total agreement. Just to give you an example of this, and we're still talking about synergy. Back in 2013, I think it was, I'm driving north on Highway 27, and the Lord speaks to me, and He says, you're going to the Navajo Nation. I knew I'd heard the voice of the Lord, and I was surprised by what He said, because the Navajo had been asking me to come for 5 years, and I turned them down every time. I just didn't feel like I wanted to go, needed to go. But when I heard the Lord say, you're going to the Navajo Nation, I knew that I was supposed to go. 2 days later, one of the apostles of the Navajo Nation calls me and says, we would like for you to come out here. Well, I didn't tell him yes because I hadn't talked to her yet. And so when I talked to Cheryl, she told me no. She said, I don't think you're supposed to go out there. But I knew I had heard from the Lord, so there's 2 things that could have happened, or that could happen. I could fight with her about it, and be in disagreement, which causes death, or I could wait until the Lord spoke to her, which is what I did. I didn't even mention it for 30 days. I prayed and prayed and prayed. Then after 30 days, I presented it to her again, and she said, yeah, I think you should go. I always remember that agreement is the power of life. This is why when you see church splits, what's taking place? Disagreement. It's the power of death. And many times it's hard for a church to overcome a church split that can be done, to overcome that because the spirit of death has already settled in there because of that disagreement. That's a good word right there. Jesus also preached. Look in Luke 10. Luke 10 and verse 1. After this, the Lord appointed 70 others and sent them 2 by 2 ahead of him to every city and place where he himself was going to come. So he also preached synergy. He practiced synergy. It was a team concept that was taking place with Jesus and the disciples. The apostles also practiced corporate synergy. And if you look in Acts 13, and remind me after chapter 1 to ask if you have any questions. It says, now there were at Antioch in the church that was there prophets and teachers, Barnabas and Simeon, who is called Niger, Lucius of Cyrene, Manaen, who had been brought up with Herod the Tetrarch, and Saul. And while they ministered to the Lord in fasting, the Lord said, set apart from me Barnabas and Saul for the work to which I have called them. And when they had fasted and prayed and laid their hands on them, they sent them away. So being sent out by the Spirit, they went down to Seleucia, and from there they sailed to Cyprus. Here we see corporate synergy taking place again. This team concept here is so incredible that the Holy Spirit never revealed who gave the word, because it didn't matter. What mattered was that the Lord was saying, separate me, Barnabas and Saul, for the work that I've called them to do. And so it doesn't matter in a team concept who gets the glory, who gets the credit, because they're working together as a team. And when they work together as a team, then everyone is responsible. There was such a symphony there that word could come forth because of that symphony. Team concept. A team comprises of a group of people or animals linked in a common purpose. Teams are especially appropriate for conducting tasks that are high in complexity and have many interdependent subtasks. A group in itself does not necessarily constitute a team. Teams normally have members with complementary skills and generate synergy through a coordinated effort which allows each member to maximize his or her strength and minimize his or her weakness. Thus, a team of sports players can form and reform to practice their craft. Transport logistic executives can select teams of horses, dogs, or oxen for the purpose of conveying goods. Now, Peter Wagner, in one of his books, and if you've never read much on Peter Wagner, I would tell you that you're missing out. You need to get as many books as you can from him and read those. He's gone on to be with the Lord. But in one of his books, he talks about how he was raised on a farm, and he loved to get in the farm settings. When he lived out in Colorado, he had a few acres. He had tractors. He actually collected tractors. But he also went to what was called horse pulling contest to see how much weight a horse could pull. And they would maybe hook up 1,000 pounds to a horse, and that horse pull 1,000 pounds. But if you hook up another horse that has the same ability to pull 1,000 pounds as this horse does and knows how to do it, how much do you pull? That's the obvious answer. But not because of synergy, it goes way up. Those horses are able to pull anywhere from 3,000 to 4,000 pounds because of synergy. So if I'm if I'm in intercession and I'm not able to move something off my territory and off my land, it would behoove me to get with someone that I can synergize with, that has authority also. Because when we come together in synergy, we can move things. We can move things in the atmosphere because of synergy. A dog sled. Today, dog sled teams are put together with care. Putting together a dog sled team involves putting together a team of leader dogs, point dogs, swing dogs, and wheel dogs. The lead dog is very treasured, and seldom will mushers let these lead dogs out of their sight. Indeed, their trained lead dogs become part of the family household. Important, too, is to have powerful wheel dogs to pull the sled out from the snow. Point dogs are optional. They're located behind the lead dogs, swing dogs between the point and the wheel dogs, and team dogs and all other dogs in between the wheel and the swing dogs are selected for their endurance and strength and speed as part of the team. And so as in Acts 13, you've got to have agreement, because when agreement takes place, authority takes place. When authority takes place, things begin shifting. The word of the Lord starts coming forth in a new way because of symphoneo. But one of the things, and you need to grab hold of this, one of the ways that you and I can only operate in symphony is if we begin to humble ourselves and take a posture of humility in our life. If it's important for you that everybody knows you had a word, then you haven't reached that place of humility yet. If it's important to you that everybody knows that you were the one who prayed and shifted things, you probably haven't reached that place of humility yet. Because it's not important that everybody knows about you and or about me. But each one of us taking our place. See, that lead dog could not pull that sled team, could not pull that sled by himself and win a race. He might can move it by himself, but he's not going to win a race by himself. It's going to require him to have other dogs working with him for that race to be won. Teams in the Bible, you have the tribes of Israel. Each tribe had its own gifting and own ability. What was the tribe of Issachar noted for? Times and season. What was the tribe of Judah noted for? Praise. Then you had different tribes that were very warlike. And so each tribe had its own gifting and ability, and each person within that tribe worked as a team under a corporate concept to better that tribe, to make that tribe what it needed to be. Tribes also came together and worked under a national corporate concept as well. There were times when all of the tribes of Israel had to come together to defeat something, whereas one tribe could not do it. The Benjaminites, when they went into Canaan land, they never could take Jerusalem. As a matter of fact, the Jebusites defeated them over and over and over and over and over again. The Jebusites were not routed out until several hundred years later when David came along. And when David came along, there was such corporate synergy between he and his men, they were able to rout them out. However, now this is what we should do. What the Benjaminites should have done was gone to Caleb and his tribe and say, can you help us? Because we can't get these Jebusites out. They would have helped them because they're part of the bigger picture of Israel. And so whenever you can't move something, you need to get some help in moving it. Leaders within the tribe work together. You can look in 1 Chronicles 12, 23 through 38. Let's go over and look at that real quick. It says, now these are the numbers of the divisions equipped for war, who came to David at Hebron to turn the kingdom of Saul to him according to the word of the Lord. Now they're about to identify these different tribes. This is so important here. The sons of Judah who bore shield and spear were 6,800 equipped for war. The sons of Simeon, mighty men of valor for war, 7,100. The sons of Levi, 4,600. and Jehoiada, who was the leader of the house of Aaron, and with him were 3,700. Also Zadok, a young man mighty of valor of his father's house, 22 captains. And of the sons of Benjamin, Saul's kinsmen, 3,000. For until now the greatest part of them have kept their allegiance to the house of Saul. And of the sons of Ephraim, 20,800 mighty men of valor, famous men in their father's households. And of the half tribe of Manasseh, 18,000, who were designated by name to come and make David king. And of the sons of Issachar, men who understood the times and the knowledge of what Israel should do, their chiefs were 200, and all their kinsmen were at their command. Of Zebulun there were 50,000, who went out in the army, who could draw up in battle formation, with all kinds of weapons, and help David with an undivided heart. And of Naphtali there were 1,000 captains, and with them 37,000 with shield and spear. And of the Danites, who could draw up in battle formation, there were 28,600. And of Asher there were 40,000 who went out in the army to draw up in battle formation. And from the other side of Jordan, the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half tribe of Manasseh, there were 120,000, and of all kinds of weapons of war for the battle. All these, being men of war who could draw up in battle formation, came to Hebron with a perfect heart to make David king over Israel. And all the rest also of Israel were of one mind to make David king. Now let's look at that, because we're looking at all these tribes coming together. What would happen if just this group right here began to pray in such prayers that it wasn't about our selfish needs, it was about making Jesus king in Florida, or Jesus king on the Space Coast? All these guys came together to make one man to be sure he got on the throne, and that was David. The whole focus was around David. It wasn't around these other folks. And this is what team looks like. Team looks like it's not important that I get any credit. I'm going to work hard to make sure that Jesus is on his throne on the Space Coast, in Florida, and in the nation. Wow. Ezekiel 37 is another place. We don't have to turn there, but you know the scripture very well, how that the prophet goes out and he looks in a valley full of dry bones. And he talked about how dry they were. And the Lord said to him, "Can these bones live?" Now, he answered very correctly. He said, "Lord, I have no idea." Some would have answered, "Ain't no way these bones are going to live." But he answered correctly. And then the Lord spoke to the prophet, said, "I want you to prophesy to these bones and command them to start coming together." And bone began coming to bone. And then synergy came into them through the sinews coming together. All that synergy is taking place. The wind begins to blow. Flesh starts coming upon them. And then they begin standing as an exceedingly great army. Again, you see that coming together of the tribes. They're coming together with purpose. Unity, and I'll probably upset some people over this, and you're just going to have to get over it. We don't need unity for the sake of liking and loving one another. We need unity for one purpose, and that's to make Jesus king within a region. And that means that I need to work with you, and you need to work with me to make that happen. That means I may have to humble myself, because there's times, listen to this, there's times when the Lord will exalt you and use you in a certain way, and there's times that He'll set you down, and you'll watch somebody else being used. And our tendency is to try to jump in there to get used like they're being used, but when the Lord sets you down, it's a set down season. He wants you to rest and relax, because there's another battle coming up. Hallelujah. Moses and Aaron, let's look at their team concept and their synergy in Exodus 4. through 16. Then the anger of the Lord burned against Moses, and he said, "Is there not your brother Aaron the Levite? I know that he speaks fluently, and moreover, behold, he is coming out to meet you. When he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. And you are to speak to him and put put the words in his mouth, and I, even I, will be with your mouth and his mouth, and I will teach you what you are to do. Again, you have the corporate synergy working together of Moses and Aaron now, creating a synergy that's going to begin delivering an entire nation out of Egyptian bondage. You have Deborah and Barak in Judges 4 and 5. I love this because this begins to classify as Deborah as one of the leaders in the church or one of the leaders in Israel. For those who have been under the tyranny of churches and leaders who said that women cannot be in ministry, we're fixing to shoot them down because she was a woman and she was a prophetess in Israel. And the Bible says that she sat under the Deborah tree. I think that's how the King James reads it. She sat under the Deborah tree, which is the Deborah, that word Deborah is the root word of that is the Hebrew word debar, D-A-B-A-R, which means the word of the Lord. Deborah was responsible for raising up Barak, who would become like the general within the army. And she goes on and talks about in Judges 4 and 5 the different ways that all these different tribes came together. And even how the angels, the stars from the heaven, begin coming together to help them. So she talks about the synergy. If you haven't read that in a while, I would encourage you to go and read it because it's a powerful word on how Deborah, Barak, and all these armies overthrew Sisera and his army. You have Paul and Barnabas in Acts 13, which we read a moment ago. They're creating a synergy. Later on, Paul and Silas. Now, let me just pause here and go back to Paul and Barnabas. Anybody remember why Paul and Barnabas aren't mentioned later on? They had a split because Barnabas wanted to bring John Mark and Paul didn't want to bring John Mark. And the word says that the contention became so great among them that they went their separate ways. Later on in Paul's writings, evidently he had a change of heart because he said, bring John Mark with you. I forget where that is. But that just shares with you what happens when we lose that agreement. Then you have Jesus and his 12 disciples. They were in agreement as well. So when you're operating in synergy, you want to operate in covenant connections. It's important to intercede with those that you're in covenant with. Say in covenant with. But one thing you don't want to do is bunk up with everybody. Because you can't be in covenant with everybody. Are you getting what I'm saying? Those that my wife and I are married, and in the marriage relationship, she's the only one I'm in covenant with. The only one. On a spiritual aspect, you can only be in covenant with people who have a similar DNA as yours. We've got some people coming in, see if they need to register Cheryl or Pam, either one. Pam or Cheryl can take care of that. So you don't want to bunk up with everybody. Let the Lord make your covenant connections. Many times we tend to lead toward personality, gifting, notoriety, and etc. to connect. And that's not God's way. Now, because of my travels through Florida and the nation, I always have people who want to connect with me. I make sure their motive is pure. Because I've been traveling Florida 18 years and the nation for almost that long as well. I make it hard for people to connect with me. So let's say they call me from Pensacola and they want to connect with me and they want me to meet them halfway. I tell them no. If you want to connect with me, you come all the way and you're buying lunch. Because I want to see if they really want to connect. Now here's what's happened several times. People have tried to connect with me and we'll have lunch together and they'll say, oh, do you think you can help us get Dutch in our church? And by the way, we want you to come as well. And my first word to them is, why don't you email his office and ask? And one of the things I do in my relationship with him is I never abuse that relationship by trying to get him to go somewhere that he does not want to go. And that's because of covenant. So you'll never be in covenant with everybody. The people that I fellowship with are the people that I go to war with, because we have that in common. We have that very common thing that we go to war together. We fight for each other. You want connections that are functional and not dysfunctional, because a dysfunctional connection will not work. Now, I can almost imagine, especially if you're mercy motivated, some of you, you've spent a lot of years on trying to change somebody and they've never changed. It's because you're changing somebody, one, that's dysfunctional, but you're helping them to be dysfunctional by continuing to try to change them, but they're not going to change. So the best thing for you to do is cut your losses and go on down the road, because God will have somebody for you to minister to that will change, that will shift. I've seen Chris right here. I've seen huge shifts in her since we've been here. Just tremendous shifts. And she's not one of those dysfunctional ones. She's willing to make the shift and make the change. Even, listen to this, even when conflict arises between those in covenant, they will find a way to work through it and move forward. God can use conflict between those in covenant to sharpen your character. Sometimes when it's time to restore a relationship, and you need this in prayer, because if you have a relationship that's not in good shape, the Bible tells you to leave your gift at the altar and go and be restored to that brother. When it's restoration time, you do not have to be right. In other words, when you're getting with that person and trying to restore that relationship, it's not time for you to be right about what happened. It's time for you to restore the relationship, because they think that they're right too. And if you bring the restoration to that point where they have to agree that you're right, then you're probably not going to restore the relationship. There's sometimes, even if you are right, and this is good for prayer, even if you are right, that you need to say, I'm sorry. Sometimes you need to do that, even though you were right. And just leave it at that. Don't try to give any excuses. That's good stuff there. Covenant warriors are partnering together. When this happens, they create an atmosphere. This happened in 2 Chronicles 5 and 7, where the minstrels began creating such an atmosphere in worship that the glory of God came in, to the point that the priests could not minister because of that glory that was on the land, was on them. Covenant partners coming together can engage the enemy with greater strength and create a momentum. One of the things that I've heard it said many times is that when I first heard this in the Bahamas, and I was still young and wasn't doing what I'm doing now. This was back in the 90s. We were seeing a Book of Acts move of God, and then when this began taking place, I called Cheryl up and I said, you've got to get Ron and Debbie to fly you over here, because I said, we're seeing the miracles, signs, and wonders that they did in the Book of Acts. And so she came, and she was in the service, and something shifted in me. And the people in the Bahamas noticed it. They said, you need to bring her more often, because you preach with more authority, and you have more power behind you when she's with you. See, that's covenant partners working together. Same thing I told Wendy last week. When Wendy comes to our church, something happens in the atmosphere. It shifts because of that corporate partnership. That corporate partnership creates a momentum. Momentum in intercession is very important, because when you get momentum, you're filling the bowls of heaven. And I'll probably talk more about this. You'll see me many times when we're up here doing corporate intercession, and I'll call certain people up to come up. I will tell them, and I tell them very strongly, do not talk to the people. Once we start praying, you pray. And there's a reason for that. The reason is that you're creating momentum in intercession, and you're filling the bowls of heaven. So here's what happens. I'm going to tell you the whole deal right now. So come up here with me, Chris. You get to be on the camera. So, can you do like this, like Lou Engle? Yep, there you go. Chris is praying. She's praying away, and then she finishes. Then it's my turn. I want to tell you about a vision I had last week. When that happens, you just lost all of your momentum. Thank you, ma'am. You lost all of your momentum. The attention is no longer on praying and vertical. Now the attention is on me. And that's why I don't let it happen. If I bring you up and you do that, you don't get to come back up a second time, or a third time, or a fourth time, or a fifth time. Because of the fact that you broke the synergy. You broke the momentum. And so momentum is very important. It opens heavens over a region. And if this is sustained, it makes great impact within the kingdom of God, and great damage is done to the kingdom of darkness. And so if she and I, Chris and I, are working together and praying, and all of a sudden when she finishes, I jump right in there and begin praying on the same focus, those bowls begin filling. And at some point, they're going to turn over and pour down on us. When two are operating in partners in covenant, their giftings and anointings are magnified, just like when Cheryl would go to the Bahamas with me. My gifting, my anointing was magnified. She didn't do that much, but she was there. And me knowing that I have somebody who's in agreement with me, and she's saying, when your own wife says amen to your message, it does something to me. It really does. When she comes into agreement, she says preach it or whatever, it just, and occasionally she will correct me also, like she did earlier. Suddenlies begin to happen because of the power of corporate intercession. So suddenly start taking place. You can go and look at this on the day of Pentecost. 120 were gathered together in a room. And they had corporate synergy that was going on. But now listen to this. 380 heard Jesus, 500 heard Jesus say, tarry in the city of Jerusalem until you're endued with power from on high. But only a third of those who heard it showed up on the day of Pentecost. Well, they might have got into it later, or maybe they were part of the crowd that got into it. But there were 120 who showed up with such synergy and covenant and corporately coming together that all of a sudden that sound comes in from heaven like a rushing mighty wind, and Spirit of God lands on them, cloven tongues of fire. They begin speaking in tongues, and then it spills from that room into the streets. And people start hearing them speak in their own language, all the different languages. They're hearing these men who did not know their language speak in their own language. And I just find it fascinating. Then the crowd said, these are drunk. And Peter stands up with the 11 and he says, these are not drunk as you suppose. Now they were drunk, but not as you suppose. They were drunk on the Holy Ghost. And he said, this is that which was prophesied by Joel. And we're moving in. This is why we need intercessors today, strong intercessors. We're moving into a time of Joel's trumpet. His blast is beginning to be released within the land. He's blowing the trumpet in Zion. God is blowing that trumpet. He's not blowing the trumpet for the rapture. He's blowing the trumpet for an outpouring of the Holy Spirit in the land. And this is why we need the intercessors. Chuck Pierce, I think this was in 2015, the latter part of it. The Lord spoke to him. I was in the meeting when he prophesied this in Ohio. He said, the Lord said this, I need my intercessors. And when he said, I've got goosebumps now. When he said that, goosebumps went all over me, and it's going all over me now. Because the Lord really needs his intercessors right now. There's things that he wants to do in the earth. Why do you think there's so much turmoil? It's because we're gaining ground. We're gaining ground. That's why there's so much turmoil. Don't try to make peace with all this turmoil that's going on. The angels of chaos and commotion are still working in America to bring about a great harvest and a great awakening. Praise God. praying through the ages. Now, the Lord, He doesn't move in time the way that you and I move in time, because we tend to think of time on a linear scale. When you look at the months of the year, you probably look at it on a straight line. January, February, March, April, May, June, July. That's linear. The Lord doesn't look at it that way. He looks at seasons and cycles is how He looks at it. And so when you're praying through the ages, there's no boundary of time. The Lord is already right now in the future operating right now. He's working right now. Some of the prayers that you and I are praying are being launched into the future, and the Lord's already working those prayers out. And I'll talk more about that later. Some of you pray for your son or your daughter to marry when they're 5 or 6 years old. Lord, send them the spouse that you want them to have. What are you doing? You're praying into the future. And so praying into the ages is nothing to the Lord. Not even in going in back to the history. The Lord is even in the history working. One of the things that the Lord is going to do, He's going to heal our history of racism in America. So in Genesis 1:22, it talks about the cycles. Let's turn over there real quick. Shouldn't be too far away. I think I wrote that one down wrong. That should be 8:22. Sweet Jesus. So write 8:22 there. It says, while the earth remains, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. The Lord actually operates in cycles so much that the calendar that He operates on is a cycling calendar. It's not what you would call a linear calendar. His calendar follows the lunar cycles, and His calendar follows the feast. Matter of fact, we're coming up here on Rosh Hashanah very soon, and so that's just the way the Lord operates. He operates in these cycles. Even our body operates in cycles. Our body operates in cycles. You're born, you're brand new, and you start growing. There's a cycle of growth that starts taking place, and then you move from the toddler stage to the adolescent, from the adolescent into teenage, from teenage into young adult. When you get to young adult, you're still not grown yet. You might be 18 years old, and the millennials that are 18 think they know everything today, but they really don't. But then as we begin to mature, all of a sudden, we'd really start understanding even the things that Mom and Dad said. The word ages, Greek word aion, means age or season or time. Ethically, the cause and current of the world's affairs. Now, there's two words for time, or for ages in the Greek. One is the word cosmos, which means the universe. And the other one is this right here, aion or aeon, which means time in a season or a time in a age. In Hebrews, the 11th chapter, verse 3, where it says, for we know that the worlds were framed by the word of God. That word there, worlds framed by the word of God, the word worlds there is the word aeon right here, or aion. And he's saying there that we know by faith that the ages, the age that you live in right now was framed by the Word of God. That word framed is the word katartizo. Means it was aligned and put into place. You're living in the age you're supposed to be living in. In Isaiah 46:10, and it's a good age too, y'all. You might want to turn there in your Bible. If you're here Sunday, you will hear this spoken again Sunday out of my message on the new era. He says here, declaring the end from the beginning and from ancient times, things which have not been done, saying, my purpose shall be established. Now again, here's the Lord. He's also speaking in cycles right here. But He uses the word in here, which is the Hebrew word akarith. And in the Hebrew way of thinking, this is how it's defined. It's like a man rowing a boat. He backs into his future. Therefore, what is behind and what is future come from the same root word, akar. So when you look at this word akrith, decreeing the end from the beginning, it's like a man rowing a boat. So you've heard the word of the Lord. That's your launching point. But how do you row a boat? You row a boat backwards. So you launch from the prophetic word that the Lord gave you, and you row into your future based on that prophetic word. What happens if you start turning around and looking? Thank you. You start going in circles, like Cheryl and I did when we were paddling a canoe one time. And she had never paddled. And I finally just said, Cheryl, stop paddling. We were winding up in the bushes where the snakes were. And so, anyway, but it's like when you get a prophetic word, you stay with it. You row into your future based on what has been prophesied to you, what has been decreed. I'm decreeing the end from the beginning, but I can't see the end, but it's been decreed. So I'm going to take that prophetic word, and I'm going to row with that prophetic word. Just like I know in my spirit, without any shadow of a doubt, I know two things. One, there's a move of God, an awakening move of God that's going to come to the Space Coast. The Lord is returning to this place. He spoke to me 5 years ago, and I shared it with Tim Franklin, and they still pray it there. This was the word of the Lord. He says, Melbourne will know the aftermath of my glory. And I said, aftermath? What is that? That sounds like something terrible. And I went and looked up aftermath. It can mean terrible, but it also means second harvest or second cutting. And so that's something you can row from. I know that there's a move of God coming to the state of Florida. And the thing that I'm seeing is that no church owns this. It may happen over here in City Hall, or it may break out down here at the Shuck Shack. Who knows? But there's a move, or at Walmart. But there's a move of God that's going to take place. And the neat thing is, what I'm seeing coming is that no church is going to own this. It's not going to be a Brownsville revival. It's not going to be a Toronto revival. God's going to come and sit on this state. Amen. So when praying through the ages, God may have you come into agreement with prayers of believers who have died. Their body may be dead, but their prayers are still alive, creating a synergy with those who pray for the same purpose. An example of this is Dutch Sheets and Gordon Lindsay. Dutch had been invited probably 15 years ago to come out there and speak to help restore what Gordon Lindsay started. The school was going downhill, and so Dutch went out there and he was preaching. And this was the first time he used the word synergy in his message. And the Lord spoke to him and he said, I want you to come into agreement with the prayers of Gordon Lindsay. And Dutch said to the Lord, I'm not supposed to talk to the dead. He says, I don't want you to talk to him. I want you to come in agreement with the prayers that he prayed, because his prayers are not dead. I just need somebody to come in agreement with those prayers so I can do what I want to do in this place. Similar thing happened to me on August the 10th, 2013. I'm in Tarpon Springs, Florida on a Saturday morning, and I just finished preaching about the dream that the lady from IHOP had. I can't think of her name right now. And when I finished having this dream, I have a full-blown vision on the back wall of this church of Hebrews 12:1, a great cloud of witnesses. And I saw thousands and thousands, maybe millions of people. But there was one man out front that was standing out. The rest of them, I couldn't see their faces because the Lord had blurred them in this vision, just like you blur a face on video. And this man was jumping up and down and twirling and leaping. And he'd throw his hand forward and throw his hand sideways. He was dressed in a black suit, white shirt, black tie. And he did this 2 or 3 times, and he was, by the way, 30 years of age. And he throws his hand forward, and he says, Ken, tap into the voice of healing. He twirled around one more time and threw his hand forward and said, Ken, tap into the voice of healing. And that was Oral Roberts. He was part of the Voice of Healing movement. And God wasn't telling me that I needed to talk to him. I need to come into agreement because the Lord wants to bring the voice of healing again into America and into this world. So he wanted me to tap into that agreement that Oral Roberts had. Praying for a nation, the same thing. You can pray with the prayers that have been prayed. There's times that I will take prayers that Abraham Lincoln has prayed or prayers that others have prayed, and I will join in that prayer and pray that prayer, creating a synergy. When interceding into the future, you're creating a synergy with the Lord, who is already in the future and is also interceding for the future. He already knows the future and is revealing his revelation for the future so that you can pray into it. Share an example with you, me and Terry Shivo. When Terry Shivo was being killed over in Pinellas Park by her husband and an unjust judge, I got a heavy burden for this. She was in hospice. She was comatose, I guess you would say. And her husband decided he didn't want her anymore and wanted to pull the plug. The parents, the Schindlers, wanted her and would take all responsibility for making sure that she was cared for. This was whole act of the enemy. So her husband goes before a judge and gets this judge, who, by the way, got kicked out of his Baptist church that he attended, got this judge to rule in favor of her dying. Well, during that time, I took up prayer call. I took up a prayer cause. And I went many times over there. I actually got kicked out of the Pinellas County Courthouse because I had gone there praying. And evidently they caught wind of what I was doing because I was praying very softly. But they have cameras and they have microphones in those kind of places, especially during this time that was very volatile. And so we lost the thing, and then Chuck Pierce calls me up. And he says this, he said, Ken, he said, I don't want you to be discouraged. You was praying for the future of America. And that what my prayer was not for euthanasia. My prayer is for life. All the way from the cradle, all the way to natural cause of death. I'm life all the way. Another example of praying the future is Will Ford and his kettle. Anybody ever heard the story of this? A few of you. Will Ford is a black gentleman. He lives in Texas. Spiritual son to Dutch Sheets. And the way he and Dutch first got together, that he had attended a conference in Colorado Springs, and Cindy was speaking, and she got to prophesying to Dutch about Dutch's name, William. That's his actual name, William. And she began saying, does anybody here know what William means? And Will Ford says, yeah, noble spirit. She said, is your name William? She said, yeah. So she brought him up there, and then she began prophesying about the covenant tour that they were going to do in New England. Now, she didn't know that, didn't know Will Ford. And Dutch is looking at Will, and he's crying, and Will's looking at him, and he's crying. And then all of a sudden, things started coming together. And in the reason they called it the kettle tour is that Will's family had a cast iron kettle. How many of you have seen those? The old cast iron kettle. They did several things in it. They would wash in it. They'd make soap in it. They would cook in it, take baths from it. They used it for all kinds of things. Well, his ancestors, slaves, owned this kettle. And they would take this kettle and they would turn it upside down and put rocks under it. And they would put their head into the kettle and pray. And the reason they did that, they need something to capture the prayers so that the taskmaster could not hear them praying. And so when Will is researching all of this, he finds out that his ancestors were not praying for themselves. They were praying for their kids and their grandkids, that they would be freed of slavery. They were praying into the future. And this is something we've got to begin doing. This is the higher level of intercession. We have to begin praying into the future. I want a conservative America for the rest of America's life. I want conservative judges. I want conservative governors. I want conservative presidents. I want conservative senators and House members. All of those. I want us to see an awakening come to the Capitol in D.C. Did you know they used to have Sunday school every Sunday in the old Senate chambers? They really did. Our first Chief Justice, who I think his name was John Jay, I believe, he taught Sunday school in this Senate chamber, the old Senate chamber, which was about half the size of this right here, this area right here. The Supreme Court then was about the size of the women's bathroom. And they only had 3 justices. That's true. Now they got too big for their britches. We've got to pray into the future, y'all. Pray into the future. Look at somebody and say, I'm praying into the future. All right, does anybody have any questions about synergy or corporate intercession? Anybody need a break? Okay. And don't wait 5 minutes and you take a break, okay? If you need a break, we'll stop right now. Prophetic intercession, to a large degree, is a new paradigm. When I wrote this book, I wrote in there a decade or so ago, and I actually should have wrote in here this time 2 decades ago, because that's how much time has passed since I wrote this book. But about 20 years ago, prophetic intercession was never heard of. We interceded for our needs. We had a grocery list that we would pray through. This type of intercession is, and even 20 years later, is still relatively new. You can go and find a prayer group on probably down the street, one of these streets here, and find out what they're praying, and they're probably praying for the needs of the people, or they're praying for their finances, or they're praying for the pastor, and there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with doing that, but there's another level of intercession called prophetic intercession. And Barbara Wintroba has a very good book on prophetic intercession. She attends Chuck Pierce's church. We're going to try to define it here. We enter into, now this is my definition, we enter into prophetic intercession through hearing the voice of the Lord. And when acting on what He is saying, it turns out we start getting heaven's results. Now, to give you an example of this, when Cindy prophesied here that He was releasing His glory on the coastline and the coastland, that's something that is prophetic I can pray into. I can pray into this coastline, I can pray into this coastland, and actually I'm praying prophetically when I do that. Another example is Jane Hammond prophesied that the Lord was going to open the wells of healing in this region. So prophetic intercession is taking that word and interceding what Jane prophesied about. Or if the Lord says something to you, interceding that He's spoken to you. If He's spoken to you about your children. Sally and I right now have a huge burden for the prodigal. And we're praying over the prodigals every office day over there. And the Lord gave me a word for prodigals about 2 months ago. He says the prodigals are weeping. It's time for them to return. And then a few Sundays ago, we got a long prophetic word. It's out on the table out there of what the Lord is about to do with the prodigals and how we're to respond. There are tremendous strengths in this type of intercession. It creates an atmosphere where God is moving and operate, and it creates breakthrough. An example of this is David and the Philistines, and we're going to turn there to 2 Samuel chapter 5. Begin in verse 17. It says, when the Philistines heard that they had anointed David king over Israel, all the Philistines went up to seek out David. And when David heard of it, he went down to the stronghold. That was Jerusalem, is what that was. Now the Philistines came and spread themselves out in the valley of Rephaim, which was also the valley of the giants. Then David inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I go up against the Philistines? Wilt thou give them into my hand? And the Lord said to David, go up, for I will certainly give the Philistines into your hand. So David came to Baal-perazim and defeated them there, and he said, the Lord has broken through my enemies like the breakthrough of waters. Therefore he named that place Baal-perazim. They abandoned their idols, so David and his men carried them away. Now the Philistines came back once again, spread themselves out in the valley of Rephaim. And when David inquired of the Lord, he said, you shall not go directly up. Circle around behind them. Come at them in the front of the balsam trees. And it shall be when you hear the sound of marching in the top of the balsam trees, then you shall act promptly, for then the Lord will have gone out before you to strike the army of the Philistines. Now I love this because here the Lord is creating breakthrough, and this is also something that is being done prophetically. David goes and he asks the Lord, what do you want me to do? And the Lord tells him, go up, you're going to defeat them. But then they come back a second time. Now, just because you got attacked by the enemy one time and you defeated him doesn't mean he's not going to come back. So the enemy comes back a second time. Now, the neat thing that David did, he didn't do the same thing he did the first time. He went to the Lord, inquired of the Lord, what do I do now? The first time, the check came in the mail. Maybe this supply is not coming in the mail this time. But we always go out and look in the mailbox because it came that way the first time. Lord, it's another check in the mail today. But I love David for this because he explains to us how there's a way to defeat the enemy, but it's not the same way every time. Ezekiel 37, here's another example of operating prophetically. So I prophesied as I was commanded. And that's very important. You don't want to prophesy your words. I think on my website, I believe it's still on there. There's a word I gave to Gainesville, Florida, back before Tebow and Urban Meyer ever came there. And they were a losing team. Zook was the coach. You guys, you remember this? They're from Keystone Heights, and which is north of Gainesville. And I gave a word that Gainesville was going to see the move of God, and this would be the sign that the losing team would turn into a winning team. When I'm prophesying that, I'm saying to myself, see, I'm an Alabama fan. I'm saying, God, why can't I say this to Alabama? I actually have had people call me and say, will you prophesy over our football team? Literally did. And then all of a sudden that fall, they fired Zook. And Zook was a Christian coach. And some of the people up in Gainesville said, Ken, you're a false prophet because they shouldn't have fired Zook. Since they fired Zook, they're not going to win a game. I said, well, we'll see. And then they hired Urban Meyer. And then all of a sudden, Tebow comes on there. Freshman starter. Loves the Lord. And by 2006, within 2 years, they were a national championship. And so it's an example of hearing what the Lord's saying and doing it. And even the chaplain on the football team, he used to be the chaplain. He used to play under Spurrier. And they were playing the Gamecocks up in South Carolina. He was the chaplain, and he had the prophecy in his jacket, coat jacket. And all Spurrier's team had to do was kick a field goal, and they were 20 yards out, kick a field goal, and win the game. And this chaplain pulled the prophecy out. He said, Lord, if this is from you, let them block that punt. Let them block that kick. And they broke in and they blocked it and caused them to have a winning season and win the national championship. That is so cool. I'll tell you another thing. This is so cool, too. In 2004, I prophesied correctly every national championship that Florida took that year. Florida took, Gainesville won that year. Tampa Bay Buccaneers won national championship that year. The Tampa Bay Rays won national championship. The Seattle, the baseball team, I think it was. No, the basketball team down in Miami Heat won national championship that year. The hockey team in Tampa won national championship that year. And this is no joke. People were calling me because they were going to bet. I would tell them, I'm not telling you. If I hear it, I will. Obedience to what the Lord is saying is what we want. And we want the Word and the Spirit. I asked Chuck one time, he and I was riding down the road, and I brought up different prophets in the nation, national prophets. And I said, Chuck, for some reason, I can't connect with them. I would like to. I said, what is it? He said, Ken, it's because you're spirit and word-based. He said, they're just spirit-based. And I said, what do you mean? He said, they feel like that every experience they have is from the Spirit of God. You weigh out every experience you have with the Word of God. And that's the way I operate. What I hear has to be spirit and word-based. It also requires the person operating this to discipline themselves to hear the voice of the Lord. So let me share this with you. God will never prophesy, cause you to dream, or give you a vision outside the integrity of this Bible. He won't do it. This is how you stay safe, is right here. And to do that, you've got to know the word of the Lord. Person walking in his will usually will have a strong Bible-based foundation. There are limitations to this type of intercession, and they are depending on the person aligning with God to hear His voice. Don't be afraid to do prophetic intercession like Cindy prophesied here, Jane Hammond prophesied here. Don't be afraid to pray according to their prophetic word. If you're not hearing, there's nothing wrong with that. Unless you're a prophet, you don't hear all the time. Prophets hear all the time. I don't hear all the time. I'm listening all the time. But I also can hear, like if you give a word, I can hear the Lord in it. Or I might hear you in it. To give you an example of this. The way we launched that Coastline and Coastland prayer tour was Sally was praying one night, Cindy's prophecy. Lord, release your glory on the coastline and coastland. And when she said that, those words came into my spirit. And I heard the Lord say, I want you to do a coastline and coastland tour, prayer tour. It was all not because I heard to do that. I heard her say that, and then the Lord began downloading into me. That was also a synergy that was taking place. Depends on the person hearing the voice of God. Not just at salvation, but to covenant to hear Him. Person also needs to be a student of the Word of God. If you're not a student, become one. Become a student of the Word of God. Get you one of these keyword study Bibles with the Hebrew and Greek dictionary in it. The definitions are by a man named Spiros Zodhiates, which goes in greater depth than Strong's does. Just like what I told you about the word end, akarith. It's like a man rowing a boat, its backs into his future. Zodhiates has that, but the Strong's doesn't have that. So you got to go beyond. Just like if you look up the word ecclesia in the Strong's, you're not going to find the true meaning of ecclesia. All you're going to find out is called out ones. It does mean that. But you won't find that in here either, but where you will find it is when you study Greek history, you will find out that a ecclesia is a legislative body. Also, a person in doing prophetic intercession has to be teachable. And that's an important thing for all of us. And we have to have a hunger to hear His voice. There were times when I was young Christian in my 20s, that I would spend 8 hours talking to the Lord and wanting to hear the voice of God. I'd just cry out to hear His voice. Church life has really messed us up. Really has. The normal Christian church life has messed us up. Because we don't think about going and spending any more 8 hours in the wilderness or even 2 hours in prayer. We wouldn't even think about doing that. In the Bible, that was what they normally did. First time I heard Pastor Yonggi Cho out of Seoul, South Korea. He was in, I forget where it was. May have been in Florida. He says, when I come to America, I only have to pray 4 hours a day till I start moving in the Spirit and experiencing the power of God. When I'm in Korea, I have to pray 8 hours a day before I start moving in the Spirit to feel the power of God. See, there's something in that, because this man he walked in a level of authority, especially in his country, that we don't walk in. And I think we've gotten really messed up in church life in such a way that we don't commit ourselves to this kind of praying. And I'm not trying to force you into 8 hours of praying, but I do want you to move into a lifestyle of I'm going to stay in prayer until I experience Him and His presence, until I tap in. Catherine Kuhlman would never come out on the platform. She would stay in the back praying until she felt the presence of God come upon her. And the worship could be going on an hour or more before she would step out there. She would never step out there until the presence of the Lord came upon her. You have to ask this also when a person's praying prophetically. Is the person praying or even prophesying his own agenda or God's plan? And it's good to ask yourself that. Is the exalted soul, which would be that carnal part of you, wanting to manipulate circumstances for his or her pleasure? Many times we can prophesy or we can pray because we want something to go our way or cause it to be our pleasure when we want it to be His pleasure. And this is one of the things, because of my age now and of who I am, when somebody prophesies to me an incorrect word, especially if it's manipulation, I will tell them, you did not hear from the Lord, that came from you. Now, there's several reasons. One, I don't want to adopt that word. I don't want it to get into me. Another reason is they need to learn how to prophesy correctly. Now, I don't do it in a mean way. To give you an example of this, a friend of mine and we went into prayer over, and I'm in covenant with this person, we went into deep intercession, and we'll talk more about that maybe tomorrow, to where we began moving things in the atmosphere, literally changing things. When we left that prayer group that night, there was about 5 or 6 of us. On her way home, the enemy spoke to her and said, I'm going to kill you because of what you did tonight. Now, the enemy can speak to you. Does sometimes more than we hear the Lord. And she went to bed that night, she had a dream. And in that dream, what we were praying for concerned me and my family. I had to have something to shift, or it was not going to go good for my family. It's nothing bad that we did, but it was just something. There was a suit that was filed against my son. And in the intercession, we shifted that and broke it and won it. But the enemy gave my friend a dream. And in that dream, we lost the court case. And she calls me up the next morning, and I could hear it in her voice. She says, I had a dream last night. I need to tell you about it. And I said, stop right there. I said, I don't want to hear it unless the dream was a good outcome. She said, well, it wasn't. I said, I don't want that seed sown into my spirit, so do not say it. And I wouldn't let her say it. Because, see, once that seed is sowed into your spirit, you have a greater warfare on your hand then than what you had before. Because that seed is sown there to create doubt in you as to whether or not the Lord did give you the victory. And so my son went to court, had the court case, and it was probably 5 to 6 weeks later before we heard anything, and he won hands down. But everything was against him. Everything. But God pulled it out. So you have to, is this voice coming from the soul or is it coming from the Lord? Which one is it coming from? This type of prophetic intercession operates from a heavenly level. Say heavenly level. Go in your Bibles to Ephesians 1. We're going to read verses 1 and 3, 1 and 20, 2 and 6, 3 and 10, and 6 and 12, all in a row. And I'm not going to tell you when I'm turning, okay? Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who has blessed us with every spiritual blessing in the heavenly places in Christ, and raised us up with Him, and seated us with Him in the heavenly places in Christ Jesus, in order that the manifold wisdom of God might now be made known through the church to the rulers and the authorities in heavenly places. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the powers, against the world forces of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places. What's the common theme there in all those verses? Heavenly places. Everything that we do should come out of heavenly places. Everything. Our relationship with Him is out of a heavenly place. We are seated with Him in heavenly places. We need to take that position, take that seating with Him. Next time you get hit with the enemy very hard, I dare you to do this. Go into intercession, go into worship, and just move up into a heavenly place and look down on it from the heavenly position, rather than being in the fray of it. Jennifer LeClaire called me yesterday. I'll share with you all the different things that happened to her in 1 week that the enemy tried to do to take her and her ministry out. A week ago, I think tomorrow, she was walking through her house and something wrapped around her leg. She thinks it was a spirit. I know it was. And she fell and twisted her ankle, and her ankle was swollen black and blue, and she couldn't walk on it for a couple of days. Then she was leaving, I think it was Monday or Tuesday, for Kansas City with some of her team, and on takeoff, the Delta engine, one of the engines goes out on takeoff. Now, you can go out on takeoff in altitude, and you're going to be okay. The most dangerous place for you to lose an engine is on takeoff, because most of the time your airplane will spiral and fall nose first into the ground, but that didn't happen. Yesterday, their church down in Dania Beach, the back wall of their church fell, just like that wall right there. It just fell. Came off of its foundation and fell. They sent me videos of it, and I've looked at it today, of videos that was on the news. And so it was amazing how much the enemy was throwing at her. And so we got on the phone together, and I said, we're going to have to look at what's causing this. And I started telling him, I said, the enemy, Pythos spirit, operates primarily in South Florida and the Space Coast, the St. Augustine, Jacksonville area, the Tallahassee area, and the Pensacola area. Those are the primary places that Pythos operates. There's a reason for that. Is one, Miami area is a gateway to the international. The Space Coast has a governmental gate, and it's a gateway into the heavens. The Jacksonville and St. Augustine area is a gateway into the ancient. Tallahassee area is a gateway of government. Pensacola area is also a gateway into the ancient. Some of you may not know this. Pensacola was started 150 years prior to St. Augustine. But they were not a continuous city because a hurricane came in and wiped them out. For 150 years, nobody lived there. And then St. Augustine became the oldest continuous city in our nation. So we went into prayer yesterday from a heavenly realm. And I told her, I said, we're going to have to stay against this Pythos thing. Every time that we slack up on it here, every time they slack up on it down there, or others slack up on it, we get a hit from the enemy. And so what Elijah did when he gets to the gate Jezreel, he should have busted the gate down and gone and taken off Jezebel's head and Ahab's head. That was his assignment. But he allows that prophetic, demonic word from Jezebel come and penetrate his spirit, and he takes off into a direction he's not supposed to be going. And when the Lord finally talks to him, the Lord says, the first thing he says, "What are you doing here?" As if though he was not in the right place. So It's very important that we operate from a heavenly level. The church which operates in intercession from the heavens is what Colossians 3, 1 and 2, we're going to read this out of the Message Bible. So if you're serious about living this new resurrection life in Christ, act like it. Pursue the things over which Christ presides. Don't shuffle along, eyes to the ground, absorbed with things right in front of you. Look up and be alert to what is going on around Christ. That's where the action is. See things from His perspective. I love this out of the Message Bible. Look at this. If you're serious about living resurrection life with Christ, you need to start acting like it. You need to start pursuing the thing where Christ presides. Don't shuffle around, your eyes to the ground, absorbed with stuff right in front of you. Look up and be alert to what is going on around Christ. That's where the action is. You want to hear the sounds of heaven also. Now, John the Revelator, he began hearing the sounds of heaven in Revelation 4:1. And he heard a voice that said to him, "Come up here." What God was about to show John could not be shown to him on an earthly plane. It had to be out of a heavenly plane. Come up here, I'm going to show you some things. And when you get up there and you start hearing those sounds, you want to legislate those sounds from heaven down into the earth. And the Lord has given me, and I'm grateful for it, an ear that can hear sounds. When I say hear sounds, I can hear sounds that are from heaven. I can hear sounds that are from the soulish realm. I can hear sounds that are from the enemy. I can tell whenever a musician, maybe they're not even singing, but their instruments tapping into the Lord. I can hear that. When I was in the hospital and Satan tried to kill me back in 2011, but he was not successful because of the Lord and my wife, I heard the sounds of the nurses. I heard the nurses that had been sent there by God, and I heard the nurses that was just their job. They really didn't care about you as a patient. And I could hear that. It amazed me. That's when I became, my gift went off the charts when I was in the hospital, and it had to because the enemy was trying to take me out. But I can hear those things. I can hear when you say something, when it's from the Lord or when it's out of your soul. So we want to become heavenly minded and begin hearing the sounds of heaven and release that sound down into the earth. Legislate that sound from the heaven down into the earth. So when that violinist, all of a sudden the Spirit of God comes upon that violin, she's not singing, but the Spirit of God is coming out of that violin. If you've been here, there's times I've had her do that violin over the people because the sounds of heaven are coming out of it. There's a resonating of that sound. I shared something else with you about the sound. Do you know what the created sound? Sound has frequency, not just tune. There's a created sound within the earth. Do you know what that frequency is? 432. Most music is played in 440. But there are people, Rick Pino is playing all of his sounds now in 432 because it's the sounds that heaven has created in the earth. Adele, the song girl that's not even Christian, she plays in 432. All of her music is done in 432 frequency. The thing about Adele, you need to grab this, is I can hear the Lord in Adele's songs and the sound that's coming out of her mouth. She's just not saved yet. When she gets saved, she's going to rock the Christian world. You want to legislate those sounds from heaven. You want to hunger for revelation. Your hunger for revelation releases the prophetic which you will intercede with. So you want to have a hunger for that revelation. You don't just want to hear anything. You don't want to necessarily hear what you want to hear. You want to hear what God is saying. When you hunger for it, it's like righteousness. You hunger for it, you get filled. Person who prays this way is not sidetracked from their position. Look in Matthew 10. (38 through 42). He who does not take this cross and follow after me is not worthy of me. He who has found his life shall lose it, and he who has lost his life for my sake shall find it. He who receives you receives me, and he who receives me receives him who sent me. He who receives a prophet in the name of a prophet shall receive a prophet's reward. And he who receives a righteous man in the name of a righteous man shall receive a righteous man's reward. And whoever in the name of this disciple gives to one of these little ones even a cup of cold water to drink, truly I say to you, he shall not lose his reward. And the reason I wanted to bring this up is because a prophetic intercessor, or anyone who is going to live a Christian life, is going to have to take up their cross and start following him, and it not be about them. It can't be about you. I need to share this. When Rick Curry and I, we were praying over America, and we had gone and met in Jacksonville. He lived in Pensacola. We met in Jacksonville, and we each got a room in the Country Inn and Suites, and I rented one of those big rooms that has 2 rooms on it, a living room. And I took the picture down off the wall, and we put a map of the United States up there because we had an assignment. And I've prayed, and then Rick starts praying, and all of a sudden I hear the sound of heaven coming out of his prayer. He said, Lord, what did he say? Oh, he said, send revelation to room 216. That was the room I was in. And the Lord spoke to me. He says, America has entered into an Acts 2:16 season. And I get in my Bible and I go to Acts 2:16, and it says, this is that which was spoken by the prophet Joel. And so he and I, that was our assignment, was Acts 2:16. That's what we prayed the entire night. We prayed probably to 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. We prayed up and down Interstate 10. The next morning we got up. We didn't have any other revelation. We were debriefing at breakfast. I go up to pack my bags. He's gone to pack his, and then I get a call from him. He says, I need you to come down to the kitchen here where we ate breakfast. I need to talk to you. I said, okay. He said, after we had breakfast this morning, I called Jennifer. And I wanted to check on my wife, see how she was doing. And he said, Jennifer, the first thing she asked me, which one of you were staying in room 216? And he said, well, Ken was. Why do you ask? She said, well, the Lord told me to ask which one of you were staying in room 216. And then the Lord told me to ask who was staying in room 220. He said, I was staying in room 220. He said, how do you know that? She said, the Lord told me that. But here's what the Lord was saying to us. Not only has America entered into this is that which was spoken by the prophet Joel, the ones that are going to carry this, the people like yourself, you've got to live a Galatians 2:20 lifestyle. That's what room 220 was. I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I that live, but it's Christ that lives in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. That's the lifestyle that we have to live. A life that is crucified with the Lord. Not being moved by other voices. I won't turn there, but in John 10, verses 3 through 5, the Lord says there that my sheep hear my voice, and the voice of a stranger they will not follow. That's important. If you ever get among sheep that have a shepherd, and the sheep are out there in the distance, the closer you walk to them, the further they're going to get away from you. But all the shepherd has to do is to walk up beside you and say one word, and those sheep will come running right to where you and that shepherd are. Because the voice of that stranger, those sheep aren't accustomed to, they're not going to follow that. So when we get saved, the voice that we need to be accustomed to is the voice of blessing, not curse. The voice of faith and not doubt. That's the voice that we need to become accustomed with. And hearing that voice, not moved by other voices. The person who walks in this type of revelation moves in wisdom and revelation. Ephesians 1:17, Paul prayed that the Lord would give you the spirit of wisdom and revelation. This is important because if you have wisdom alone, you become an old wineskin. Some of the Pentecostal churches that have been around for years, not all of them, but some of them have become old wineskins. And they don't move in revelation or the unction of the Spirit anymore. They just move out of what happened to them years ago. They have a lot of wisdom on them, but they've become that old wineskin. If you move only in revelation, you become flaky. This is why I was talking about the intercessors earlier. This is why pastors think that they're flaky. Is because most of them are moving out of revelation and not wisdom and revelation. And as I was saying, it's important to learn the language of your pastor before you present something to them. It's important to build relationship with them. Everybody today thinks, well, the pastor's supposed to build a relationship with me. It works both ways. It works both ways. Go after them. Take them out. Everybody's waiting for the pastor to take them out. Take them out. They're waiting for him to shake or her to shake their hand. You go shake their hand. I'm on one of my soapboxes now. We've got such an insecurity about us. If the preacher doesn't shake our hand, we'll say, the preacher didn't even shake my hand. Why don't you go shake it theirs? Preacher's never taken me out to lunch. Why don't you take them out? Thank you. I needed that. A person who operates this way is not need-oriented, but is kingdom-minded. This is an important place that you as an intercessor have to get to, is to where you're kingdom-minded and not need-minded. Did you know that Jesus was never, ever motivated by the needs of the people? Because he said this. He said, what I hear my Father say, I say it. What I see my Father do, I do it. He did meet needs of people, but only because he saw the Father doing that. So he was not motivated by needs. As a matter of fact, he walked by the man at the gate beautiful and never healed him because he wasn't motivated by the man's need. The Lord knew, the Father knew that there would be a day after Pentecost where Peter and John would walk by there and 5,000 would get saved on that day. And so he's not motivated by needs. As a matter of fact, he'll let you die before he comes prays for you. So when do you give up hope on someone on a deathbed? After they've been dead 4 days. That's even after 4 days he can raise them. He stinketh. You don't want to be need-oriented. You want to be kingdom-oriented. You don't want to focus on your needs. You just need to grab hold of some good Holy Ghost boldness and break off every emotional need that you have. Break it off in Jesus' name. Don't be driven and led by your emotions. If you do, the enemy's going to knock them off your shoulder, or he's going to send somebody to knock them off. Then you're going to be upset with them because they knocked off your emotional things off of your shoulders, and just decide, I'm not going to be an emotional, needy person. I'm going to be a kingdom-minded person. That's a good word there, too. And that get too many amens on that, but I'll just tell you it's a good word. The inverted church or introverted church, which is what a lot has become today. The introverted does everything from an earthly perspective. Where's the inverted or introverted person focused on? Themselves. Focus is placed on the individual or the needs of one or many. Instead of praying from a heavenly place, prayers are from an earthly place. And so you don't want to be the introverted church. You want to be an extroverted. You want to be an extroverted person when it comes to praying. This kind of prayer, prophetic intercession, or actually the introverted, it ministrates rather than legislates. And I'll say this too. Fivefold leaders spend way too much time on trying to make people happy when they need to be getting before the Lord so that they can be carriers of the word of the Lord. As a matter of fact, the apostles would not even be decided they would not be the ones that would attend to the daily needs of the people. They said, let's pick out 7 men among you who can do this, because we want to give ourselves to prayer and to fasting. But in the church today, we have expected from the pastor or from the apostle or the prophet or whoever, everything but carrying the word of the Lord. I made the mistake when I had our first church in Montgomery of telling them that I was raised in my dad's shop and worked on cars. There was a car in front of my house every week. But that's not what I should be doing. Hello. So when I moved to Florida, you know what I told them when I moved to Florida and took the church? I worked at a paper mill for 10 years. If you have any paper mills, I know how to do those. Nobody had a paper mill. This is good. Don't expect stuff out of your leader that is unreasonable. Don't expect, and I don't think, all your babies are grown, right? Don't expect them. We've had to babysit people's kids so that they could go have a night out. We couldn't even get a night out. Hello. All right. We want to legislate. The introverted church works through earthly ideas with the consensus of a multitude. It administers man's plan. It pleases people, etc. This is earthly wisdom. James talks about earthly wisdom that it's devilish. Earthly wisdom becomes a dependency rather than heavenly wisdom. Focuses on needs of people, is people-minded, and it is a dysfunction through codependency. Thank you, Cheryl. I was about to go that direction. Within the church today, we have a dysfunctional body. And it's dysfunctional in a way that the people in the congregation need somebody to tell them, I'll meet your needs. So they'll say, you come to our church, I guarantee you we'll meet your needs. And then that person in the pulpit needs you to need him. And all of a sudden you've got a codependency going on there. No equipping, no authority, no power, nothing like that's taking place. You become a dysfunctional, introverted church then when it's like that. And so I know the Lord wants to meet your needs, but just go after him and his kingdom, and all these things will be added unto you. You don't have to go after your needs. You just go after him. His kingdom will supply all of your needs according to his riches and glory by Christ Jesus. All right. Anything else I need to add to that, sweetheart? Turn in your Bible to Romans 8. (34). Who is the one who condemns? Christ Jesus. He is who died. Yes, rather, who is raised and who is at the right hand of God, also intercedes for us. He's interceding from a heavenly perspective, not from an earthly perspective. Let me share this with you. Did you know that the Lord is in charge? You may tell you what he's not. He's not in control. And some of you are going to have a hard time with this. She's getting it. He's in charge, but he's not in control. Because if you say the Lord's in control of everything, then the person who was raped, the person who was murdered, that was the Lord doing that. So he's not in control, he's in charge. I've learned to change my vocabulary in that way, because Psalms 115 verse 16 says that the heavens are the Lord's, but the earth he has given to the sons of men. So the way we see America right now is not the Lord's doing. He's in charge, but he can't do anything because he's given this earth to the men, sons of men. So it's up to you and I to shift this nation. It's up to you and I to get bold and not be introverted, become an activist in prayer, an activist in action out in the world, become an activist and see this nation shift and change. Say He's in charge. Okay. And number 3 there, challenges to prophetic intercession. Now, Psalms 91 says that he that dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. I've often wondered why it was called the secret place. Because it's always secret. You go there a little while and the Lord will move it on you. He really will. In other words, it will require you to do something different next time you want to try to get in the secret place. Maybe you've been getting in the secret place through praying in tongues. I have. But the next time, it may require me to sing in the Spirit. Or it might require me to sing songs. There was a time in my life back years ago where I got real depressed over a situation in our church in Montgomery. And for about 2 weeks I was depressed, and everybody in the church was saying, "What's wrong with you?" And I wouldn't tell them. And finally I decided, I've got to break out of this. And so I began singing old black spirituals. And as I sang those, all of a sudden my soul began to break free, and I started coming out of this depression as I was singing this. And there are different times that God will bring you out of things in different ways. So you want to be able to be sure and get into that secret place. It may be secret and different from where it was last time you went after that secret place. And this requires going into deep intercession. You don't just get into the secret place by just saying a couple of words in prayer. The secret place, in that secret place, you get in there and you begin communing with the Lord. It requires deep intercession. Sometimes it has required me praying 2 hours in the Spirit to get into that place. Sometimes I get into that secret place just like that. Sally prayed something, I think it was Tuesday morning at the office prayer, and when she prayed it, it immediately launched me into the secret place. Whenever we finished prayer there, I told them, I said, I've got to go to the church. I said, the Spirit of God's all over me. I've got to pray right now to get this prayed through. And so we did. I prayed that through, and then Tuesday night we prayed it through again. But that word she had immediately took me into the secret place. I knew I was in the presence of the Lord. And so the secret place becomes secret all the time. He reveals this place, but when you become comfortable, He moves it. You ever read the book, Who Moved My Cheese? I love that book. How many's read the book, Who Moved My Cheese? If you've never read it, you need to get that book. It's a secular book, but it's a great book on what I'm talking about right now. The other danger of this is a rut, just what we've been talking about, getting into a rut of doing things one way. When God may have you pray a certain way in a past season, He probably wants to change the prophetic word for this new season. Now, I will say this about a prophetic word. It does not have an expiration date until it comes to pass. And I teach that on my teaching on prophecy. It doesn't have an expiration date. Another danger of this is the mixture of soul and spirit. That a person can start off in the spirit and then all of a sudden shift to their soul. The Lord can give them one or two or maybe one sentence to pray or one sentence to prophesy, and that's all that He's given them. But because many times we have the desire to go beyond that, we'll get into our soul and say things that the Lord's not even saying. This is a challenge for each perfect person in prophetic intercession will have to face and deal with. The soul represents our desire and self-interest, which is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The Spirit represents our dependency upon God, seeking His desire, releasing only His Word, which represents the tree of life. Rick Joyner has a great book called There Were Two Trees in the Garden. And one is the tree of life, which represents life and life more abundantly. Then there's a tree, and that tree represents our total dependency upon the Lord. Then there's a tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which is independent from the Lord and represents dependency upon ourselves. Now here's the vast majority of Christians eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But you know how they eat from it, how they justify it? They eat from the good side rather than the evil side. That good side is self-dependency. It's when we depend upon ourselves. When we're not being totally dependent upon the Lord. When we're not binding ourselves to Him or waiting on Him. Many times we come, just like Abraham did. God said, you're going to have a son. Well, let me see if I can help him out. He was eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil when he did that. And the thing is, I always say this when I preach about this, I share this again. Whenever you see a person preaching and they're drawing attention to themselves, or a person singing, they're drawing attention to themselves, or a person dancing, they're drawing attention to themselves, person praying, they're drawing attention to themselves. They're eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And I can tell you how I know whether you've eaten of it too. It's when they pick that fruit off that tree and throw it at you, and you like it. That's how I know that you're eating from it as well. And I could really tell some stories right here. And all of us have eaten from that tree. But we want to endeavor to eat from the tree of life. Because anything that takes the focus off the Lord is coming from that tree of knowledge of good and evil that person's picking from. I went to a meeting one time in Orlando. I was invited to come. I was not a speaker, but they wanted me on the platform. They wanted me to help promote the meeting. And so I go and I'm up on the platform. And this guy is preaching. I could tell by what he was preaching, I could not eat of that fruit because it was a tree of knowledge of good and evil. There was pride in his voice, pride when he preached. But when I got up and left the platform is when he started praying for people. And when he started praying for women, he would put his hands directly on their breast and pray for them. And there was 20 of us on that platform. And I got up, nobody else but me. I got up, and 500 people in here, I got up and exited the platform. Because if I stay there, I'm acknowledging that fruit is good. And I was not going to acknowledge that. And then the host, she came out and talked to me. She said, I am so sorry. I said, why did you have him? She said, I was recommended to have him. And I don't know the person that recommended him, but I can guarantee you this. They also ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil as well. And so we need to be aware to eat from the proper tree. It's what I'm going to say going to produce life. And let me just take this a little bit further. Let's just say I have a son or a daughter that gets in trouble and they disobey my rules and regulations. When I approach them, am I going to approach them through anger and madness, eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and passing that fruit to them? Or am I going to eat from the tree of life and pass that fruit to them? It applies to every area. If you say something to me that offends me, and maybe you threw fruit at me, am I going to take the same fruit and throw it back at you? Or am I going to pick from the tree of life and give that to you? Kind word, Bible says a kind word turns away anger. And sometimes that's all it needs to have just to cut right off an angry situation. Watch out for the mixture of the soul and spirit. We've looked at Ezekiel 37 and how the Lord began bringing this whole prophetic team together. And it's one of the best scriptures on prophetic intercession and declarations. I want to go through this one chapter. I know we're getting close to our time, but I need to finish this one because we'll have 5 more to do tomorrow. Anybody need to go to the restroom? Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute break. So go. There's also restrooms down this hallway here. If the women's restroom or men's restroom gets full, there's restrooms right down that hallway there. We're going to look at strategy and tactics. Strategy is a biblical word. We're going to look at not 1 Corinthians 10:4, but 2 Corinthians 10:4. It's another mistake. I need somebody to proof this stuff for me. 2 Corinthians 10:4. And 1 Timothy 1:18 we'll look at also. It says, "For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but divinely powerful for the destruction of fortresses." That word warfare is a word strategia, and it means an expedition or campaign or military service. And the kind of intercession that we're talking about tonight is not soaking intercession, but it's military intercession. It's intercession that busts things open, it breaks things. It's breakthrough intercession. It's intercession that shifts the heavens and moves things in the earth. I gave him 5 minutes. They can watch it later on. When you define this in a secular dictionary, it's a science or art of combining and employing the means of war in planning and directing large military movements and operations. It's a planned method or series of maneuvers or stratagems for obtaining a specific goal or result. Now, just to give you an example of a strategy that Cheryl and I did, that the Lord gave us. We did the US 1 Liberty Prayer Tour back in 2003. It went from 0 mile marker at Key West and went all the way to the Georgia line at St. Mary's River. And we stopped along the way at every major city along the way and met with the church of that city. I had little Liberty Bells that I gave out to the leaders that were with us in each one of those meetings. But it was a strategy that the Lord had given us of releasing Leviticus 25:10 along US 1, because US 1 was known as the Freedom Highway back in slavery days. Although it was called the King's Highway was US 1, and the slaves used it as a Freedom Highway. And so I had a desktop Liberty Bell, and we would go into these cities, and we'd take the bell and ring it, and I would say, "Freedom!" Just as loud as I could. And we would talk about Leviticus 25:10, and we would talk about the Liberty Bell and how God was trying to bring freedom back into this nation. Another strategy I'll share with you too was just recently on May the 7th, I went with 7 other people to Washington, D.C. on the 7th of May to drive around the city 7 times, and we left at 7 p.m. to do this. Everything was in sevens. But we were to drive around the city 7 times. This was the word of the Lord from Chuck Pierce, that Dutch was to take a team to Washington, D.C., and drive around that city 7 times, decreeing this right here, that the deep state is being uprooted, and that the evil structures that have ruled have fallen. And so it wasn't less than a week, all of a sudden we start seeing the deep state being uprooted in our nation. It's still being uprooted right now. And so that was one of those prophetic prayer assignments along with strategy that got almost instant results. Within a week, we started seeing the results of that prayer. Judges chapter 1, verse 1 and 2, you know the story. They said to send praise out first. So praise is also a biblical strategy. Sometimes in intercession, the Lord wants you to do nothing but praise, because praise is a weapon. My. I think I'm seeing an angel right over here, right between Cheryl and Josh. There's something. I look over here and I don't see it, but when I get right there, I see it. It's like a glory cloud that's right in there between you two. Wow. Another strategy is praying in the Spirit. Jude verse 20, it says, "But ye, beloved, building up yourselves on your most holy faith, praying in the Holy Ghost." It is also a strategy of prayer that can unlock heavens as well. There's also ambushment types of prayer. ambushment method uses the concealment as its main weapon. Say concealment. Now, this is important because if you hang out with me, you're going to go and pray in some places where they don't need to know that you're praying. Because I like to go to the devil's den and pray. I like to do it outside this church. What we did for 2 weekends in a row, that's who I am. I am that person. And I'll talk more about this ambushment and concealment in a minute. The act or instance of lying concealed so as to attack by surprise. The act or instance of attacking unexpectedly for a concealed position. Sometimes when doing prayer strikes, I don't even advertise them to the public. Don't even tell them that we're holding a prayer strike. At times, concealment is required to accomplish the Lord's objective. I still see that glory cloud over there too. In high-level strategic prayer sites, you also have to pick your team. The focus is not on the individual, but on the assignment at hand. So pick your team according to gifting, the authority they carry, their alignment, their commitment to the assignment, maturity, etc. Every situation is different. And this is important, and I may talk about this more tomorrow in prayer strikes. But when you're doing a prayer strike and you're doing high-level prayer strikes like we're talking about tonight, you cannot take a person with you who is not healed, who has emotional problems. You can't take them with you, or they will manifest on you in that meeting because of the fact that you're going up against big dog principalities. You're not going up against little bitty demons. And I've had this happen where when we first started doing prayer strikes, I did just the opposite of what I did. I advertised it. I told everybody in the church, we're doing this prayer strike down in Fort Meade. And this is the time we're going to meet there. So we get down there, and a lot of people showed up. But it didn't turn out too well because I was having to minister to this one person who became emotional wreck right in the middle of that meeting. And we were not able to do our assignment. And our assignment was not on the need of that person. So that's why I pick my team when I do a prayer strike. I pick the ones I want to go on it based on their DNA, spiritual DNA, based on their gifting, how they hear from the Lord, their commitment to the assignment that either God's given me or God's given them. To give you an example of this, when I go with Dutch Sheets and he has an assignment to go to D.C., we're not doing my assignment. We're doing his assignment. So I'm totally there to support him and to pray in unison with him. Now, I could have said when we were there on May 7th, I could have said, I really feel like we need to go and tap into George Washington Memorial down here, or go to the Lincoln Memorial and tap into that. I feel like the Lord has something for us there. That would have been my assignment and not Dutch's. And I would have been throwing the whole thing off base and out of kilter. So when I go with him, I totally submit myself to his assignment. Just like the day we had that assignment, I did have an assignment, but it wasn't when we had the prayer strike. I flew in early to D.C. to go up to Bill Nelson's office to do business. And some of you know the kind of business I was doing. But I did that not on his time, but on my time. You also want to, in tactics, you want to have the right word. A right word in its proper season will dethrone the enemy and begin to set proper order. Decreeing the Word of God, the Bible, carries tremendous weight. 1 John chapter 5, verse 14 and 15 talks about that. Talks about that we have the petitions that we have. This is the confidence that we have in Him, that if we've asked anything according to His will, He hears us. And we know if He hears us, then we have the petitions that we have desire. And so sometimes decreeing that word, the Word of God, if you have an assignment but you're not getting anything prophetically, go to the Bible. It'll work every time. When we were going into the Supreme Court and praying for the justices to be removed, our word was, go and do it. So we felt like the Lord wanted us to use scriptures. And so I'd take Isaiah 22:22 and fold it up in my hand. And it was there in the Supreme Court. And I just start decreeing this. I say, Shebna, you're about to be fired. Some of you judges are about to be fired. And when we went there to pray, this is another strategy. We had our eyes open, and we prayed like this. We didn't get loud. And I used to take people to D.C. and train them. Do you ever go with us to D.C. and get training? And train them how to pray in government. And this is one of the things I told them all the time. I was always having to tell them, keep your eyes open. But I told them, I said, if you fall down in a Pentecostal travail, I will walk away from you and say, depart from me, I never knew you. Or if you go into your senator's or representative's office and you start praying with them in tongues, I will walk away from you, because most of them don't understand that. Paul said, be like Rome when you're in Rome. Decree the Bible. It will accomplish, Isaiah 55, 10 and 11 says it will accomplish what the Lord sends it to do. 1 Timothy 1:18 talks about warring with the prophetic word. I want us to read this. This is important. This command I entrust to you, Timothy, my son, in accordance with the prophecies previously made concerning you, that by them you may fight the good fight. You can get a prophetic word previously made, and you begin warring with that. Just like we're doing with Cindy's word, Jane's word, we're warring with those words. You can begin to get results. This is a strategy. The word command here, if you read it out of in the NASB or other places, I think King James says charge, is paraglia. It's a charge by apostles, a proclamation, an apostolic charge. This was not just a suggestion that Paul was given to Timothy. This was a strong apostolic charge. The root word is para, meaning near or nearby. It has the meaning of being from or out from. It also expresses motion. And the root word agleia, message, is related to aglias, a messenger to announce, proclaim. And the word previously made is to pro, before, or forth. And then ago is to lead, to go before, leave when others follow. So this is what happens when the Lord releases a word. That word is gone out in front of your destiny. It's literally released in front of your destiny. And if you begin warring in prayer with that word, it will hasten the time that you get to it. Some people never get to that word because they don't never war and pray over it. Give you an example of a friend of mine. Some of you have heard me say this. Wes Clark, he is an outfitter, does elk hunts out in Colorado. He's promised to take me on one next year. And but he always wanted to have a television show that he would give away hunts, like to veterans, or maybe a hunter had lost his limbs in Afghanistan, lost his legs. Take him on a hunt and give it to him totally free. But he wanted to film this and put it on TV. And Cindy Jacobs prophesied over him that he was going to do this, that he would have his own outdoor television show. And so he calls me up. He says, I want you to pray with me and what's his wife's name, Cheryl, you remember? Me and my wife. Because we want to see this come to pass. And so this guy made this prophecy, he and his wife, 20 minutes a day, every day. Didn't matter whether he was in hunting camp or up promoting at some Bass Pro place, promoting who he is. He and his wife got together 20 minutes a day, and all of a sudden he calls me one day. He says, we're going to do it. It goes on the outdoor channel. We're going to do it. And see, when he was just an outfitter, he was operating in tens of thousands of dollars a month. But now going into the television show, he had to operate in hundreds of thousands of dollars a month. And God swung it all around and caused it to happen. And they called it Higher Ground. That's what the name of the show was. And you would go on, a hunter would go on that show, maybe a veteran or whatever, go and kill an elk. They put that on there, and they talk about thanking him for the service that he did. All of that. They had sponsors. And he's been off for a while, but this coming winter, they're filming right now as we speak, because archery season is in right now. And they're getting ready to film again, to go back on the TV this winter around January. So it's just exciting. But when you take those prophetic words and you pray those, it hastens you to your destiny. It accelerates the time that you connect with that prophetic word. Man. Holy Ghost prophetic word. At times your team member will release a prophetic word that should be acted on. Don't wait for the words just to come from you. When you're operating a team member may say something that shifts the whole thing. Get into team Holy Ghost thinking that will release the word of the Lord for the season that you're in. There's times that I get together with Dutch and we'll get 5 or 6, 7 people together and we'll have a Holy Ghost think tank. And just like secular world has a think tank, there's a Holy Ghost think tank. And you just get together and you're talking and you're praying and eventually the word of the Lord comes out. And I love these kind of things. But it takes people having a different level of thinking. They have to be able to think the way the Lord thinks and think on it from a heavenly perspective rather than an earthly perspective. I can't get over what I'm seeing over here. It is crazy. Word of the Lord can change everything around you. Okay, we're going to stop right there. Anybody have any questions or anything before we leave for the night? I think it's the New Testament version of Leviathan in the Old Testament. Yeah. You know, one of the things Chuck Pierce saw years ago back at a meeting in Jacksonville, he saw a snake coiled here in Florida. And even when he had that vision in 2008 on Ellis Island, and he saw the covenant states, he saw what looks like a serpent going up through the state of Florida. And what he said, it was an evil root trying to intermingle with the covenant root that Florida has. But I do remember it was in 2005 because I hosted the meeting in Jacksonville, and he said there was a evil snake in the state of Florida. So I've got a whole teaching on that. I think it's on my website, and I know it's on Kingdom Gates' Facebook page on Pythos. Anybody else? Pythos. It's in Acts 16, where Paul was casting out the spirit of divination out of a young girl. That word divination is pythos. It's where we get our word python from. And it's amazing how that the thing that we're dealing with the most in Florida is the thing that they deal most with in the Everglades down south of here. That is destroying the habitat in the Everglades, is the python snake. And the pythos spirit operates just like the python snake. Just exactly right. Exactly like it constricts. Anybody else? Okay. Well, thank you for coming. We're going to start at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. We bless you.